Welcome to a Sunny Side Up Life podcast, a show for the woman who is ready to live an abundant life full of freedom and positivity. I'm your host, Sami Womack, a nationally recognized money expert, budgeting coach, and your very own hype squad. I'm on a mission to help you break free from survival mode, gain financial freedom, stay motivated, and focus on what matters most. Join the movement and let's start living on the brighter side of life together. Just a reminder that everything discussed in today's episode will be linked in the show notes. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at A Sunny Side Up Life. If you're ready to take control of your money and need guided instructions, check out my free budgeting challenge by going to asunnysideuplife.com. Now, let's get into the episode. All right, you guys, today we are talking all about emergency funds. How much do you need in your emergency fund? How do you actually get this thing saved? Where do you put the money once you have it saved? When are you allowed to use it? And all of these common questions that I hear on Instagram and from my clients, we're going to talk about them today. This episode was actually inspired by an Instagram post that went viral. And we posted it back in October, and it is still getting comments. And anytime a post goes viral, it's not actually all it's cracked up to be, because your content reaches non-followers. It reaches people who maybe don't want to hear what you're talking about, aren't used to your content, aren't used to your voice. And it always kind of brings out the haters, brings out the naysayers. And you know, a post going viral is not really all it's cracked up to be, but it usually brings about for some good spin-off content, which is what we are doing in this episode. So we're going to talk about some excuses and complaints that I actually heard in the comments and my responses to them. So I think that it is all really helpful, kind of constructive in a way, because it's things that I hear all the time from my clients as well. And I am going to answer them for you. So let's dig into this. All right. Right off the bat, how much do you need in your emergency fund? Which is what this original post was talking about. I'll link to this in the show notes if you happen to miss this post. But basically, it was an example of, if this is your bare bones budget, and it totals up to this amount, this is how much your emergency fund needs to be. So in this example, which is just an example, the numbers are merely placeholders. As we know, personal finance is personal. Everyone's bills are going to look different. Everyone's mortgage or rent amount is going to look different based on where you live, which country you live in, which, if you live in the United States, which state or area you live in, how big your house is, how big your family is, what your goals are. All of this is so subjective. And a lot of the comments were really getting hung up on the fact of acting like these numbers were just gospel truth. And like, this is the only numbers that exist. And I'm like, you guys, this is an example. And I just kept saying, again, this is an example. Because people are just getting really caught up on these specific numbers. So don't get caught up on the example numbers anywhere you see any post. We have to put some kind of numbers for you to have somewhere to start. So in this example, these people's bare bones budget was $4,200 a month. Okay, that was their housing. That is their utilities, electric, water, insurance, cell phone, internet. It was some for groceries. It was some, maybe you have a car payment still, like, you know, even if you have debt on your car, like, let's keep paying for it, right? Because we would like to get back and forth to work, especially if there's an emergency going on, or if we're unemployed, we've got to get out there and look for a job. So your car can still go on there. Childcare, right? We still send the kids to daycare or pay for school or whatever we need to do. And clothing, that got some people that was on there. This is just an example. We'll talk about the person who had a problem with the clothing. Either way, kind of do your bare bones. This is something that I actually help my clients do. I've had several people that are in the middle of working with me. They're in the middle of their 12-week contract, and them or their partner, it goes through a job change, either on their own, they want to change jobs, or they get laid off. And so sometimes we kind of go into storm mode is what that is called. And so that is like, hey, I got laid off, or hey, we're in the middle of a move, or hey, we're having a baby, or someone is seriously sick or injured. Something catastrophic is happening. We're having a storm. So we're going to go into storm mode and we're going to kind of hunker down and only do the bare minimum of spending. V actually just had a great episode about this, talking about her husband losing his job and kind of what they did, tightening up their budget. And it was super helpful. And I think it's really vulnerable to talk about that as our own example. But I loved the honesty in that episode and talking about that. And she's been very transparent, talking about all the things that they've had to do, which is exactly what you do, right? You go into storm mode, you hunker down. Okay, let's go in bare bones. And so I do that for a lot of my clients. It's also really helpful, I think, to know your bare bones numbers. If you are someone who works in sales, on commission, or entrepreneur, because these folks have this mindset of, tell me the minimum money that I need to make. And then I know anything above and beyond that can go towards my goals, can go towards saving, investing, and debt. So those numbers can be really helpful to know for a number of different reasons. So if that's something that you're like, hey, I would love to know my bare bones numbers. That feels really overwhelming to me. That is something that I can help you do in coaching, but it is definitely something that you can do on your own. So kind of going through your budget and really being like, for sure on our spending, like what could we cut back? Like we could cut out restaurants. We could probably like maybe slim our groceries down a little. You know, we can maybe do some free fun instead of spending $100, $200 on date nights. Like maybe we go for a walk or go to the park, or, you know, go to a friend's house or something. And we cut back date nights, or maybe we can ask a friend or family member to swap out on babysitting, so we don't have to pay for a babysitter when it's date nights or something like that. Like there's probably ways that you could cut back. There are those like nice to haves. But when we're really talking about a bare bones, we're talking about like needs, right? We're really talking about they have to go to daycare. That's a non-negotiable because they have to go to work. We have to have electricity, water, internet, cell phone. We have to have all of those basic utilities. Of course, we have to pay our rent or our mortgage. And then, of course, like your minimum payments on your debts. If you're still carrying consumer debt, that would go in there. Your minimums. If you still have a car payment, if you have student loans, if they're not in forbearance, what are the minimums on all of your debts? Include all of that. Write up a monthly, okay, bare bones minimum. What could we get by on? And there are some things that people are going to be like, it might be kind of more in a gray area. And again, I will tell you, personal finance is personal. Some people will say, I'm not cutting my gym membership out because my mental health will go down the drain if I don't go to the gym. Like I'm not cutting therapy out because, I have my suicidal moments, and obviously I'm not going to be any good to anyone if I am not seeing my therapist. We don't want you to cut out medicine, like things like that. And there are going to be the other people that are like, oh my gosh, you could totally go without the gym. Okay, we're not going to talk about that debate. That is your personal decision. Again, that's when a post goes viral and people start debating all kinds of crazy things in the comments. And I'm like, hey, this is not your budget, friend. Like if it's your budget, you get to decide what is necessary. I'm not going to tell you yes or no. Can you keep Netflix? Maybe cut back some streaming services and say, we want like one streaming service because we're going to go crazy if we don't have some way to unwind. I'm not going to tell you like cut off your internet, Okay. So get your bare bones budget, kind of figure that out, determining the right amount for your emergency fund. This is big. So this is basically what we do. We're assessing those monthly expenses. We're kind of reviewing all of those things. And then we're kind of considering the length of time. So for this example, if their bare bones monthly budget is $4,200, okay, a 1 month emergency fund would be $4,200. And our goal is to get that much saved so we could go 1 month without working if we needed to, right? We could cover 1 month of all of these things. Hopefully it will never get to that point, but if you are completely out of work, that might be reality. Sometimes it is not just joblessness, which we'll talk about this in just a little bit. But before we, I don't want to dig into that right this second. But again, so if $4,200 is 1 month, a 3-month emergency fund, 12,000, and then we go up, 24,000 for 6 months. So you just kind of grow it from there. But the thing is that sounds like a lot. So you're like, well, I don't know, because you hear people say you need $1,000 emergency fund. You hear people say you need a 3-month to 6-month. Well, which one is it? 3 months or 6 months? Again, personal finance is personal. And I'm going to tell you that anything in savings is better than absolutely nothing. Of course it is. I would rather you have $50 than have $0. I would rather you have $5 than $0. I would rather you have something. Anything is better than nothing, and you can always grow it over time. So I would love everyone, of course, to have a 6-month emergency fund. We're not going to get there overnight. We're not going to get there overnight. And that sounds overwhelming. And it sounds like, why even start? I can't do it. It's too much. So what I say is start small and let it build as you go. We'll get more into that in just a second as well. Next on my list is evaluate your circumstances. So again, you're like, so this is my personal situation. I'm not really sure. So we reflect on our personal situation. Again, this is something that I can help you do a little more specifically. It's kind of hard to give, generic advice on some of this type of stuff of what exactly is right for you without knowing your whole personal situation. So kind of assess your factors and decide, like, do I need a larger emergency fund or a smaller one? So some of those things that kind of determine that is your job stability, is also how many streams of income your household has. You might have one stream of income and have a 5-person family. You might have 2, 3, 4. I've seen, I think the most I've seen, I had a client and she was married, and between the two of them, they had 5 streams of income. I think that's probably the most that I've seen. She had 3 jobs, he had 2 jobs, something like that. And so theirs might be a little bit of a less emergency fund because they're probably not going to lose all 5 of their jobs all at the same time. But the other side of thinking of that is, what if one of them was to get hurt? What if one of them was disabled? What if one of them was in a car accident or something, or really sick? Then that person's entire streams of income, if they have 2 or 3, all of them would be gone, because that's dependent on that person, not necessarily just the job stability. So that is very differing, right? How many dependents do you have? Do you have a lot of mouths to feed? Are there a lot of different people depending on you? Or is it just you? Or is it you and your partner? Do you have a 2-person family and 2 streams of income? Doesn't seem quite as scary. I mean, it is still scary, but it's not the same as a 6-person family and 1 stream of income. So again, it's going to vary on the amount of money and the number of months that you need to be covered for. Everyone's health is going to be different. Everyone's home maintenance, car maintenance, things like that. I don't know. How new are your vehicles? What kind of shape is your house in? Are you renting? If you're renting, then it doesn't really matter if your water heater goes out. It doesn't really matter if you need to replace your HVAC system, because your landlord will do it. All of that varies. How many pets do you have? I've had several clients that have been on their debt-free journey and have a major vet bill. Because if you're like me, our pets are part of the family. One of my clients, she had just really started to kind of get ahead of the game on her budget. And then her dog broke his leg. And it was a few $1,000s, and he had to have surgery and all this stuff. And she's like, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, oh yeah, I would definitely go into debt for my dog. Like she had just kind of started to get like caught up on her bills and all the things, and her emergency fund was still a baby emergency fund. It was not enough at all to cover this emergency. And she was like, but now I'm really seeing definitely why I need an emergency fund. I was like, exactly. It's a hard lesson to learn, but we kind of learn it the hard way. And we're like, next time something like this happens, I will be ready. And she went even farther into debt, which is probably this is exactly what I would have done in that situation too. That's what I told her to do. I was like, if it was my dog, I mean, my dog's basically my son. So I would go into debt for him if he had a broken leg. So kind of evaluating those circumstances. A question I got that I thought was definitely worth answering was an emergency fund should depend on your overall job security, right? Like if your job is recession proof or not. And that's how I answered. I said, yeah, it's basically, is your job recession proof? But again, kind of what we learned during the pandemic, jobs who are quote unquote recession proof might not be pandemic proof. You would think that of like, well, people would say, oh, I'm a server, I'm a bartender, I'm something like that. That's going to be recession proof. Is it pandemic proof? We kind of learned that the hard way, but we can't plan for unforeseen circumstances. Also, is it like a unionized position or not? Different things like that. Of course, that's all going to affect it. So what I said was recession and job loss aren't actually the only emergencies we should worry about. Sometimes that's all we really focus about. And again, like what I said, it could be more like home or vehicle repairs, medical bills, and things like that. But we also kind of have to take into consideration. So we're crunching these numbers, right? We're multiplying our monthly expenses, just like we talked about, 3 months, 6 months, all of that, and kind of taking all of these factors into consideration. What number kind of sounds good? For us, for a while, our number just happened. It was an even number, and it just happened to be a roughly 5 months worth of expenses. That kind of just felt like a sweet spot. Honestly, what I tell my clients, so when they're like, I don't know, should I do 3 months or 6 months, or how much is enough? When do I stop saving and start like investing more? When is my emergency fund good? When can I be like, all right, done, moving on? I say, consider all these factors. And when I work one-on-one with clients, we kind of talk through all these factors. And honestly, there is never going to be a perfect number. You do kind of have to just take all those things into consideration: the size of your family, how safe your job is, what your bare bones budget looks like, all these factors. And then you kind of have to just make an educated guess. I'm sorry, but it's really not that complicated. It's not that strategic. It's just, we kind of get to a point where we're like, 5,000 sounds like a good number. I've taken all these things into consideration. I've looked at my budget. 5,000 sounds good. 20,000 sounds good. 40,000 sounds good. Whatever. Like, you decide. And also, the next thing is the milestones. Also, I think people think that you just somehow magically go from 0 in your savings account to 40,000. Obviously, that makes absolutely no sense unless you like win a lottery or come into some inheritance or sell a piece of property. Those are pretty much the only ways that that's going to happen. And I have seen that happen, and that's fabulous for those people that it does happen. I had a client who came on a couple months ago, and she was like, hey, I'm getting this inheritance. I think it was like 30,000. I think it was a grandparent that passed away. And she's like, I really want to do right by this money. I've had some people that have come into, that have had lawsuit settlements or divorces get settled, and they come into a large sum of money, or they sell a piece of property. I've had several people sign up for coaching because of that. They're like, hey, I want to do right by this money. What do I do with it? And that's where we kind of come into like crunching all these numbers and doing all the things. Hey, this much for emergency fund, this much towards the debt. And we kind of work through all of that. But But at the end of the day, it really is just you kind of picking a number and being like, that feels safe. And also kind of realizing that that number, just because you decide that's like level 1, doesn't mean that you're done. Okay. So like where Dave Ramsey says $1,000 emergency fund, then start hustling and paying extra on your debt. I say, actually, that's not terrible advice. I'm not so set in stone on the $1,000 exactly. Sometimes I tell people 500, like 500, and let's pay extra on your debt. But then let's also like automate your savings so you're still stashing away like $100 out of every paycheck and kind of doing both. And that doesn't work for everyone. So that's not like blanket advice. But some people that is really helpful. Other people, I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Like you're not paying extra on your debt until you have like 3,000 or 5,000 because your job is really unstable, or you have a lot of kids, or your vehicle is old and the transmission's going to go out any day, right? It really depends. But the thing is that it's not a one and done kind of thing. And it is incremental growth. It is milestones. And so sometimes I'll ask my clients, what's your emergency fund savings goal for this calendar year in 2024? By the end of the year, what would you like that emergency fund to look like? And then it can still grow in 2025 and 26 and on and on and on. So that is part of it too. And it does seem super overwhelming if you start to be like, oh my gosh, I need $40,000 in my emergency fund. I have 5. Of course, you're going to feel overwhelmed. You have to start with a realistic initial goal. And so at first, your goal can be, I'm going to get to 500. I'm going to give myself a little treat, and I'm going to be so proud of myself. And then I'm going to get to 1,000. And then I'm going to get to 2. And then I'm going to get to 4. And you're going to keep going and going and going from there. So that's something that we have to kind of work on. You know, we got to do those little rewards along the way. And it can be something really silly. It can be like, we're going to go out to a really nice dinner. It can be, I'm finally going to get that thing that I needed for the house. I'm going to replace my tennis shoes. I don't care. Doesn't, and whatever. You can do a little color chart. There's lots of great color charts for free on the internet. You can make your own. You could do stickers. I've seen people do like transfer a rock from one jar to another. You can do that also for savings or debt, just one way or the other, right? I'm building up money or I'm chipping off money, whichever way you want to do it. But we need to do it in small incremental goals because it does look like we're climbing a mountain if we just are like $40,000. Oh my gosh. For the past 4 years, I've worked with over 100 clients one-on-one, real women who took action on making big changes to their finances. My coaching sessions are designed to give you completely personalized budgeting support. Together, we'll organize your bills, build better spending habits, pay down your debt, build your savings, and invest for the future. I'll help you get a system in place that will set you up for success for years to come. I'll answer all of your questions along the way, talk you through all of your mindset blocks, and most of all, I'll be there to hold you accountable. So this time will be the time that you'll finally stick to your budget and make those dreams a reality. Visit asunnysideuplife.com/coaching to apply today to see if one-on-one budget coaching is right for you. So what we do is we work on building the habit and building that discipline. We'll talk about how discipline apparently is a trigger word for me in just a second. So we create a dedicated savings account for this emergency fund. And that can be with your local bank, the same bank that your checking account is set up with. That works. You're probably not going to earn a lot of money there. Sometimes, in my case, I was actually losing money because they were charging me a monthly fee. So I was actually losing money in my savings account. And I was like, okay, that's not good. So I set up a savings account. I went with Ally. Also, there's a lot of really competitive rates nowadays. They're called high yield savings accounts. You might see them as HYSA, abbreviated on social media. If you've ever seen that, that's what that means. It means high yield savings account. It's not an investment. It is literally a savings account. It is just at a bank that usually does not have a brick and mortar location. I know Capital One does have some brick and mortar locations, but usually doesn't. And therefore, they can give you a higher return. Also, they are competitive with each other. They want your business. Ally wants your business. Capital One wants your business. SoFi wants your business. So they're going to be competitive with each other to offer higher and higher rates. Right now, at the time of recording, they're roughly in the 4% range. They're going to give you 4%. That is really good, especially considering when we're investing in the stock market, we like to factor in an average of 8%. And that's with an investment, a place that you potentially could lose your money. A savings account, you're not going to potentially lose your money. It's safe. It's in a savings account. It is FDIC insured. You're good. It's not going anywhere and you're still earning 4%. So I personally love Ally. But Capital One, SoFi, I have clients that have them. There's some others. Some credit unions do pretty decent. So think about that. But have a dedicated account for this emergency fund where it could earn you a little bit, but also it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You can access it electronically, but it's not right there where you're just tempted to just be like, I could pull $50 and order pizza. I'm really tired and I'm out of spending money, just kind of, over there. But also somewhere that if you have a flat, you're on the side of the road, you need to call a tow truck. They're expecting a card when they get there to swipe for their services. You can do a transfer quick enough. A lot of them have Zelle attached to them, so you can Zelle yourself if you need to, and you can pay side of the road, really time sensitive emergency if something like that happens. So back to the discipline being a trigger word. So in these comments, someone asked, how do you not dip into it? Which we'll talk about that in just a second. And someone replied, they asked me, how do you not dip into it? And then someone else took it upon themselves to reply, just have discipline. Okay. Well, discipline, for one, is a learned habit. We have to work at that. It is not just like, oh, I wake up one day and I'm so disciplined. No, it is a muscle that needs to grow. And usually there are a lot of underlying issues that make it not as simple as just have discipline. People who have had severe money trauma, who have been through financial infidelity, who maybe just weren't taught what to do with their money. For me, I was so out of touch with wealth and savings and all of this type of stuff that when I very first started my debt-free journey, I followed Dave Ramsey, and I remember his advice of $1,000 emergency fund. And I scoffed. There's not a better word for it, at $1,000 because it was so much money. I didn't even have a savings account, didn't even have anything. I thought a savings account was like a piggy bank. Like I didn't know any different. I thought it was like a joke. I didn't know that people really had savings accounts, like normal people. I knew that like wealthy people did, but not regular people, not like middle class people, right? And so he said $1,000, and I literally was like, who has $1,000 just laying around? Is this guy for real? So I saved $500. That was my very first emergency fund. And of course, the very first emergency that popped up was like $800 emergency. And then I was like, oh, that's why you have $1,000. And I learned really quickly. That was a muscle that needed to develop. That was a milestone that I wasn't ready for yet. I wasn't ready for $1,000. My mental capacity for that was not there yet. And that's okay because I was just a little baby budgeter back then. I had to do the first milestone of 500 and then get to 1,000. I had to learn how to only touch that if it was an emergency. I didn't just wake up one day and have financial discipline. It was a muscle that needed to be developed and something that took several months to develop and took real life experience of me having that $800 emergency and me saying, oh, that's why I needed it. Oh, okay. I'm ready. Now I know. Like my client going through having to pay for her dog's leg surgery. She was like, oh, this is why we need an emergency fund. Got it. And someone can tell you versus you experiencing it, it is totally different. When you're experiencing an emergency versus someone saying you really should have that, you're like, well, and then you have the emergency and you're like, oh, that's why. Okay. So we have to learn this. This is through learning and building habits, habit building. This does not happen overnight. So how do you not use it? That's always a question that I get. Once you've saved an emergency fund, how do you not dip into it? So number one, high yield savings account, out of sight, out of mind. Great. So just make sure that you at least have instant access to some of it in case you do need a tow truck. I'm speaking from experience. I've had to swipe my debit card on the side of the road for $200+ This one time we had a blowout on our fifth wheel camper. And there's no way, we're not changing that on our own on the side of the road. So anyway, we didn't have a spare tire for it anyway. So we would have had to call someone regardless, but we're on the side of the road. We need that money right now. So we did a little quick transfer, had the money, and we were good by the time the tow truck guy got there. So, but you do want to have the majority of it kind of out of sight, out of mind. High yield savings account, also great. You can earn a little bit of extra money over there. We love that. And then you do kind of learn, again, it's a muscle that needs to be built. So you are learning over time what constitutes an emergency and what is just me mindlessly dipping into it because I'm out of spending money and I don't feel like cooking dinner. And oh, well, I'll pull $50 and I can order a pizza. Also speaking from experience, I've done this. I hate cooking. I get really tired and I'm like, it's $50. Who will ever know, So we do kind of have to build that discipline. That is a muscle that needs to be built. That is a habit that needs to be built. But on the flip side of that, you are allowed to use this money if you really need it. And the beautiful thing is you get to decide if and when you need to use it. You get to decide what is considered an emergency. Personal finance is personal. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's your money. It's your budget. You don't need permission from me or any other stranger on the internet or Dave Ramsey or God himself. You don't need anyone's permission to spend your money. It's completely up to you, which is terrifying and freeing all at the same time. Okay. So what I think is what constitutes an emergency? That's what everybody always wants to know. It can be something as big as a job loss. Your car's broke down. Your air conditioner is broken in the middle of summer. Again, speaking from experience. Your dog needs an emergency surgery. Again, speaking from experience. I will go into debt for those if I have to. That's to me, I'm for sure. Okay, my dog needs an emergency surgery. This happened to my sister and she's like, what would you do? Her dog had a life or death situation. He ended up not making it. Rest in peace. He was my second soul dog. And it was I think it was $4,000. And my sister's it was really a toss up. It was really slim chances that this was even going to save him. She's like, what would you do? I was like, I would do it. If it was me, I would go into debt for it. Now you might think differently and that's your opinion. But my thought is if I would go into debt for it, I would also drain my savings for it, right? And if I have it in savings, I'd rather use the savings. My car is broken down. I have to have a car. My air conditioner goes out in my house. It's 100 degrees in Texas in the middle of summer. Yeah, I'm going to pull from emergency fund because if I had zero in savings, I would also go into debt for that. So that kind of like that severity to me, that's level 1 for sure. Something that it has to happen. I don't care. I will pay interest on it if I have to. Then there are kind of like the medium things. And there are small things as well, right? So basically, those kind of like medium and small things are basically something that would stop you from paying your regular bills. And something that maybe in the past you would have went into debt for. So those are kind of things, some people are going to get upset about this, but Christmas, travel. Okay, it's not a quote unquote emergency, but you are allowed to like use your savings for that. Especially if it's the beginning of your journey and you're like, I already had this trip planned like a year ago. And now all of a sudden I'm going to do this budget. Like, are you telling me I can't go on my trip? Like, well, it's up to you. Are you willing to pay interest on it if you put it on a credit card? Are you willing to slow down on savings? Are you willing to take from the savings that you already have built up? That's up to you. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's kind of just, it's up to you of, are you realizing in the big picture what this really looks like for your journey? I've had people still go on trips. I've had people back out of those trips. I've had people put Christmas on a credit card, even though they're like at the beginning of their debt-free journey. And they're like, it's kind of too late. I can't cash flow it. I'm like, okay, well, let's just try to be as frugal as we can and not go into any more debt than we really have to. And again, if you come to Christmas and you're like, I really don't want to go into any more debt. But my emergency fund just got to $1,000. Okay, well, maybe you take 500 of it and try to cash flow Christmas. Try not to drain your savings. Or something like that, some kind of hybrid of that. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It could be like, it's not really an emergency, but it is kind of time sensitive. That it's up to you. Also, kind of building that muscle, building that discipline of, is it something you could say no to? Is it something that could wait? Right? That's up to you. That is up to you. That's up to you. That's up to your partner. That's up to an open debate. If you're working with me as a coach, that's something that we would talk through. We'd weigh the pros and cons. We'd do the math. We'd kind of figure it out. I think that when these comments pop up, when posts like this kind of go viral and it gets people that aren't already my followers, that aren't really used to this kind of content, they want to be like, no, it's not an emergency. You cannot spend it. It's not that rigid. It's not always like that serious. Calm down. It's okay. And it's not always a right or wrong answer. It's not always that rigid. It's not always that complicated. It's not always that difficult. Do you really feel like you need to pull that money out of savings? Yes or no? It's up to you. Another thing that people were kind of pressed about was one of the examples. We had that line item of clothing. I think I mentioned that earlier. And people were like, somebody said, why is clothing there? I'm just assuming they said it in this tone. Why is clothing there? Assuming you lose your job, shouldn't buying clothes be the last thing on your mind? Okay, I'm just assuming it was in that tone because it sounded sassy to me. My thought was, number one, again, this is just an example, which is exactly what I said. But what if your kid hits a growth spurt and it's during the changing of a season? I've literally had people like slow down how much they're saving or paying off debt because they live in like Michigan or Minnesota or Alaska or one of these northern states and like, yeah, my kids need snow boots. So my kids need winter coats. So I'm like, all right, cool. That is a need. What do you want them to do? Go outside and like negative, I don't know, however cold it gets up there. I don't know about real winter. Go out in winter conditions and like no snow boots. I'd say, yeah, let's look for a sale. Let's look if we can thrift them, buy them secondhand. Let's find them on Mercari or Facebook Marketplace. Let's try to do as frugal as possible. But like, if you need to pull money out of your savings account for that, right? Or what if your kid like needs uniforms for school? They hit a growth spurt. Suddenly they can't fit in any of their school clothes. If you're a parent, that feels like a medium-sized emergency. Like I try to do it as frugal as possible, but like it's got to happen. So apparently this person did not have clothing. They were very nice in the response to that. They were like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. Thanks for clarifying. I was like, yeah, okay. Well, obviously you're not a parent. So, but yeah, again, that was an example, you guys. It's okay. But you know, it does feel stressful to try to build an emergency fund, but I promise that it's much more stressful to not have one. Like my client learned with her dog's surgery, right? And just kind of remember, I think this is good to just kind of keep this in the back of your mind of an emergency fund is not like, it doesn't just stay there. Like you save it once and then it's just there forever and it just sits there and you never touch it. You're allowed to pull from it and put it back. And as you build the muscle of discipline with your budget, you will get better and better about allowing yourself to pull from it and then putting it back. And some people need to automate that. Again, like I mentioned earlier, some people have $100 out of every paycheck or $100 a month or $50 a month or $500 a month. The number does not matter. Don't get hung up on the number. But it's really like building that habit there and automating it and knowing that even if you have to pull from it, we're going to put money back. Some people do better with whatever's left over is going to savings. That's usually the route I go just because I've been doing this for so many years and it makes more sense to me. You guys, really full transparency. There are some times where I'll put 2,000 or 3,000 at a time in my savings. And there are also times where I'll pull like 5,000 out like it's nothing because I got to pay for something. I got to cash flow something. And I'm okay with that now. And I don't really like to do it, but it doesn't scare me because I always know that we'll put it back. Or I always know there's more where that came from. It'll be fine, you know. But I've spent 10 years building this muscle. Okay. So it's not going to happen overnight. But that emergency fund is meant to be that safety net. It is meant to kind of help you sleep better at night, shield you from that financial stress. It is meant to build a defense against you and whatever life throws at you. And life will throw something at you. Life is not picking on you. I know it feels like it when you're already down, you're already struggling, you're already like at your rock bottom, you know, you're drowning and then somebody hands you a kid, right? I love that Jim Gaffigan saying of like, what does having 4 kids feel like? Feels like you're drowning and then someone hands you a baby. That's pretty much what this feels like. But life is not picking on you. It's just life. Life is lifing and life is going to life. And that's what it does. Things are always going to break. Somebody's always going to get sick. Something's always going to need to be replaced. Holidays are going to keep happening. It's always going to happen. So it is like kind of building that defense, being that safety net. It is a way to wean yourself off of needing debt, of grabbing a credit card the first time something breaks or somebody is sick. It is weaning yourself off of needing to put things on an affirm payment plan or having to get a payday loan or having to make that dreaded phone call to that friend or family member that is your go-to every time you need to borrow money. This is how you do it. This is how you wean yourself off of needing debt, of going farther into debt. And it is slow and it is steady. And this is how we do it. So on that topic, some of the I put this in my notes as excuses slash complaints because I didn't know the lack of a better way to put this. So in these comments, I get a lot of people that at first they want to come up with this isn't possible. I can't do this. And I don't want to pick on them because honestly, you might be having some of these same thoughts. Exactly like what I told you about what I thought about Dave Ramsey's $1,000. I thought that's ridiculous. Who has that much money? Because it was literally so far out of my field of vision. I just couldn't even fathom it. It was not anywhere close to my reality. And so I want to bring up some of these comments because you might be thinking the same thing. And I want to kind of squash that negativity and let's just go through these. So one comment said, that would take me 3 to 4 years to save. Yep. I mean, literally, I'm that's exactly right. It might. And other people, they might have that much free money where they're extra money where they're just kind of oh yeah, I'll build that up in about a year. Other people, it might be a long process. You might not have a lot of extra money right now. You might be paying for daycare or private school, or you might have really a lot of consumer debt. And so you might have a lot of minimum payments. I've had people have $1,000 or $2,000 in minimum debt payments. That might be your reality. You're I don't even have, I'm negative. I don't even have the money to do this. And that might be true. And it might take 3 to 4 years. And it might just be a slow and steady process. But usually once you get that ball rolling, it will go faster usually than you really think it will go. But it's not going to be an overnight process. Someone else said, I'm just poor. I was oh my goodness. That's not a fun comment. So my response was, setting up a budget will help maintain the money that you do have. Budgets are helpful for every income level. I have had clients literally under $30,000 incomes to, I think my highest earning clients, maybe $600,000 annual incomes. I've worked with everybody in between. I've worked with people that their net worth is negative $1 million. And currently I have 2 clients that are over the $1 million mark, and they both got there during our years of working together. I don't think no, that might be a lie. I'm thinking of one other client. I think she might have already been over the $1 million mark when we started working together. So I might have 3, but it's very rare out of over 100. But my point is that even if you have a negative $1 million or a positive $1 million, you still need a budget. There are still people who are beginning budgeters. Maybe they just have a lot of equity in their house. Maybe they've been investing in their 401k for 20 years and they're hey, I should probably worry about the rest of my budget. And they just so happen to have a lot of equity in their home or a lot of retirement that's been on automation, and they just kind of haven't touched it, and they just kind of accidentally got to $1 million. That's actually what 2 out of 3 of those clients, that's their case. So no matter which end of the spectrum you're on, everybody's budget is going to look different. No matter what spectrum of the income level you're on, you still can benefit from a budget, I promise you. And setting up a budget is going to help you find money that you didn't know was there. And it will help you kind of see where those small leaks are. It's usually in our spending. Sometimes it will be in, maybe we're overpaying for our cell phone or our insurance or something like that. We can kind of cut those bills back a little. Maybe we can pare down our subscriptions a little. Maybe we can do with just 3 streaming services instead of 10 or something like that. And just those little small leaks that we can kind of find that money and say we find $50 a month, save that $50 a month. There you go. And just automate it and set it up the 1st of every month, the 15th of every month, or every single Thursday or every other Friday. I don't care. Set it up on automation to go automatically from your checking account to your savings account. Automate it and then treat it like it's a bill. Treat it like it's a non-negotiable for that money to go into savings. And that's how you do it, slow and steady, and let that money build up. Or if you're like, hey, I'm just poor, like this person said, you find things to sell. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like, I'm going to sell, maybe I'm going to have a garage sale, or I'm going to sell things on Facebook Marketplace. Even if it's $5, take that $5. I sold a bag of baby clothes. I used to sell baby clothes as my kids were growing. $5 for like a Walmart bag, like a grocery bag on Facebook Marketplace, meet people in the Walmart parking lot and sell them $5 a bag. I've done garage sales and sold things for $0.25 and let that money kind of pile up. That's what I did at the beginning of my debt-free journey. That's how I got my first baby emergency fund. That's how I paid off my smallest debts when there was like not 2 nickels to rub together. I found things that I could sell for $5 for $0.25. I let it add up. I went around my house and found all the change, I rolled my change, let that be like my baby savings account, and just kind of tried to get that ball rolling. Find something small. Even if you do just feel like I'm so broke, I can't even like find a nickel. I don't know what I'm going to do. That is what you do. You find little things, you find $50 here, $5 there, and let it build up. Okay, next. Someone said, I love it, like the example, but most people don't even make this amount to save. Okay, so my example was a $4,200 month. All right. Very true. This is my response. Very true. Everyone's budget is different. The thing about an emergency fund is that it can be built to fit your needs. And it can also start small and grow over time, which is exactly what I said. It's not an overnight process. Also, working on your budget. Sometimes there are small leaks in your budget. You can clean it up to find more money. This is true for basically all of my clients. It's supposed to be proportionate to your monthly expenses. If you don't make as much, you don't have to save as much, right? So if your income is lower, you don't need to have as high of an emergency fund because you won't have as much income to replace. So someone who makes $500,000, their emergency fund is going to look very different than someone who makes $50,000. It should be a ratio of some sort to your income, to your monthly expenses, to your household need. So just because that example of $4,200 a month might not relate to you, doesn't mean that it's not possible. Okay, someone else said, might look good on paper, but sadly, most of the country doesn't even make enough to save $500 a month, let alone $250. With the current cost of living, this chart is not feasible, let alone realistic. All right, well, the number you can save will definitely look different for everyone. That's exactly what I've been saying. You don't have to save $500 or $250 for it to be viable and to be worthy of you patting yourself on the back for it. Like I said, start with 5, start with 10, start with 50, start small, let it grow. Just because your first month you can only do 5 doesn't mean that 10 or 20 months from now, you're not going to be able to do a couple hundred. Okay, so find some things to sell, cut back on your cell phone, negotiate your insurance, things like that, switch electricity providers, do little things to find money, cut back on going out to eat or something like that, replace something, find $5, stick it in savings. You get to the end of a budget period. It's like tomorrow is payday. Oh my gosh, I still have $3 in my spending account. Yay, go me. I didn't overdraft my account for once. Take that $3 and put it in savings. Start at exactly 0 on payday. That $3 still counts because if you left it in your spending money, it would just vanish. It would just disappear. That's not even enough to like buy a coffee. But in your savings, you're like, yay, $3. It feels so different in savings versus spending. So let that money just slowly pile up. That is exactly what my clients do. That is exactly what I do. And it is going to be slow. It is going to be slow. I'm already telling you that. I'm telling you, it's going to feel slow. And that's okay. Give yourself little treats, little rewards along the way. Find an accountability partner. Give yourself a coloring chart. Give yourself a sticker chart. Buy yourself a coffee every $100 increment, like whatever you have to do. Take you and your partner on a date night when you reach 500 or 1,000 and incentivize it and make it fun, because it might be a long journey for some of us. You know, here I am 10 years later, you guys. I didn't get here overnight. So with that being said, I hope that this episode was helpful to you. I hope that it squashed maybe some of those negative thoughts that you've been having towards saving and building an emergency fund. And I hope that it answered some of your questions. Let me know on social media what you thought about this episode, or leave me a review and let me know there. Again, I hope that it was really helpful. And that's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out for another episode of a Sunny Side Up Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and leave a review. 5-star reviews are what help the podcast grow. Don't forget to check out the episode show notes for links to everything that we talked about in today's episode. And if you want to access all of my free resources, or you want to learn how to work with me one-on-one, head over to asunnysideuplife.com to get started. And if you want to keep up with me in the day-to-day, don't forget to follow me on social media at A Sunny Side Up Life. Well, that's all for me this week. Bye, guys.